Welcome to Note Distinction insert videos number 4 and 5. We actually sandwiched two of the insert videos together today because it's kind of a special day. If you're one of my normal students, you're probably wondering why in the world we had this full intro at the beginning. That's not normal. Only the classes usually have the full intro. This is just an insert video, but it's a little bit different because I'm also going to put this one out for public use on the YouTube page so that people can check it out. This is kind of a way for me to let people that are not normal students for Note Distinction kind of see exactly what it is that we do in the class. So I'm speaking to everybody now. So if you're new to Note Distinction, welcome. This is just the insert video that, on our insert videos, we kind of go deeper into what it is that we're studying. And the lesson that we just studied, we actually studied the piano keyboard. So in today's lesson, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look at the history of the piano. So let's jump right into it. Now, let me tell you, the history of the piano, I mean, where do you even start? I mean, when you're talking about a piano, you're originally talking about, you know, a keyboard instrument. You can see part of mine right here, a little keyboard instrument. So if I just start the history, maybe let's go now and go back, right? So how far back you want to go? Let's start right here. We got an electronic keyboard. The history of the electronic keyboard is that it just popped into existence one day and people started playing it. End of video. Just kidding, that's obviously not how it worked. So the history of the keyboard going into, or starting from where we are right now, there are all manner of electronic keyboards. There's synthesizers, there's sampling keyboards, there are MIDI controllers, there are workstation keyboards, there are so many different types of keyboards, and they all have something in common. They have these keys, and they're arranged in the same type of manner, and they have the same note names. So that's a good jump off point, right? Now, when I talk about the keyboard, I'm talking about, some people call those a manual. If it's on an organ, we call those a manual. But we're talking about the keys and the way that they're arranged. Now, obviously, it didn't start with electronic keyboards. But if we go back from right now, let's go back to 1935. And talk about the Hammond organ, which was created by Lorenz Hammond and John Hennert. They manufactured this in about 1935, and it was a really great invention. And people still play this instrument today. If you've ever heard any kind of gospel music or any kind of rock music, I mean, the Hammond organ has a very signature sound. You get that Leslie speaker spinning, and it just has such a great sound. You've heard it a million times. You might not even notice it, but if you go and listen to some people on the internet somewhere, or go buy some Hammond organ music, there's organ trios, there's a whole bunch of different groups that use the Hammond organ. Got a very signature sound. Go back a little bit before then. That's 1935. Let's go back before 1900. We're going to look at 1896. Yes, electronic keyboard instruments did exist. Even back in 1896, a man named Thaddeus Cahill invented the dynamophone, also known as the telharmonium. And now this electric synthesizer actually used the tone wheel to make its tone, and it was a great invention. It was big. Obviously, you're not going to take this one out on a gig, but it was a great instrument, and in its own right, it did a lot of it. It kind of paved the way for electronic keyboard instruments. All right, but we need to get out of this electronic synthesizer thing. I mean, even after the Hammond organ, there was the Moog synthesizer. I guess I don't want to forget that. Robert Moog actually invented the synthesizer, and it kind of took off. A lot of people use it even today. It's kind of it has a vintage sound to it, but it also has a modern sound to it. And, you know, it's electronic, but it's a keyboard, and it's really cool. So I didn't want to forget about Bob Moog. He's a great guy. Some people pronounce his name Moog. That is actually a normal pronunciation of the name. But he, with his Dutch heritage, chooses, he actually did a video on it. He actually chooses, he said when him and his wife got married, they chose to use the Moog pronunciation, which is the one that they use in Germany and in Europe. So there's that. But let's go before this electronic synthesizers, and let's talk about the pianoforte, because that's really the beginning of the piano, right? We go back to a man named Bartolomeo Cristofori of Padua, Italy. And it's kind of argued, but between 1700 and 1698, or 1698 to 1700, that's of course AD, this individual actually made the first pianoforte. Now, he was a pretty handy guy. He lived from 1655 to 1731, and he's like I said before, he's of Padua, Italy, and he actually was appointed in 1688 to the Florentine court of Grand Prince Ferdinando de' Medici Medici, my Italian, my Italian, wow, to care for its harpsichords and eventually for its entire collection of musical instruments. So he was in charge of taking care of all of these instruments, and he knew how they worked. He could repair them, he could maintain them, and he, in his time, came up with this hammered mechanism. This hammered mechanism that you hit a key, and then inside of the pianoforte, this device would strike a string. This device is actually called a tangent, and the tangent would strike a string, and this thing called a damper would come off of the string. There's a great video online. It's actually on a YouTube page called Who Is Het Mogelijk? That's the best Dutch I have. As a matter of fact, that's the only time I've ever spoken any kind of Dutch. I don't have any Dutch. I use Google Translate for that. But there it is. And it's on a YouTube page called Who Is Het Mogelijk? And they have a video called Grand Piano, How It Works. You should check it out. It's fantastic. Somebody's actually done 3D rendering of the entire mechanism. And you may not know, but the mechanism for a piano is very intricate. Very intricate. And this one guy, Bartolomeo Cristofari of Padua, Italy, actually invented this himself and manufactured himself. And people didn't even really know about this instrument until, like a decade later, really. And so there's that for the pianoforte. Now, you may be wondering why they call it a pianoforte and why today's is called a piano. Well, the pianoforte was actually, if you know anything about musical terms, which we talk about in our Note Distinction music journey, piano is a musical term which means dynamically soft, which means quiet, so to speak. And forte is an Italian word and a musical term for strong. You could say loud. Usually that has a negative connotation in the musical realm, but forte means strong. A fort, a military fort is a stronghold, right? So forte means strong. And the pianoforte was an instrument that you could actually play piano and forte on the same instrument. Now, that might not seem like it was a problem, but if you go before the pianoforte, let's talk about some of the instruments that existed back then. 1631, the bent side spinet, and it was actually credited to Girolamo Zinti in 1631, and this spinet was actually a device that had a keyboard, manual like this, but it actually, it was kind of sideways. It was kind of weird. It had a bent side. It's a bent side spinet, and the devices that he used, he would press a key, and instead of it having a tangent that would hit a string and bounce away from it, it would kind of hit the string and stay there. And so there were issues with dynamics there. But the spinet was actually kind of in between, just before the pianoforte, so it did have some dynamic variety, and it did have its own sound to it. But prior to the bent side spinet, there were harpsichords. 1521-ish, but the harpsichord itself had no dynamics, and really it was too quiet. It was too quiet to be played in a hall for larger audiences, and it also had issues with the dampening of the sound. The reason the harpsichord had problems with dynamics was because the harpsichord actually used quills to pluck the string. And so no matter how hard you press the key, it would still only have that one action of plucking the string. And so it would let it vibrate, but you could press the key really hard and it would pluck the string at one strength. You could press the key kind of softly and it would pluck the string at one strength. It was always the same dynamic. And so there was a need for dynamics, and so that's where Bartolomeo Cristofari came up with the, I said Cristofari. Remember that band Cristofari? Wow, okay. So Cristofari actually came up with the hammered mechanism and the tangent. Now the tangent was already in use before on the clavichord, and the word clavis, of course, means keys. The clavichord actually was around in the 1400s, and it had a tangent. The thing is that when somebody pressed the key, the tangent that in the piano it strikes and bounces away from the key would actually stay on the string, and the very act of it staying on the string would kind of mute the string from producing a good tone as it stayed out. I mean, obviously it would have a good tone, but it just wasn't a sustainable tone because the tangent would stay on the string based on the mechanism. It's down, that means it's on the string, and you had the key up, that means it came off the string. So the clavichord, of course, the tangent stayed on the string, didn't let the sound come out. Now, before the clavichord, there was a clavicitherium. And the Clavis Ethereum was quite different. And as you're looking at the Clavis Ethereum, you're starting to notice that it's just old looking, right? It's not ancient, but it's just like coming out of the Middle Ages, you know. And this is the 1300s. You know, this instrument had the same makeup with these keys, right? The clavis was there, you know, and they, you know, when you're playing that instrument, obviously it's a totally different shape, it's a different purpose and different use for it, and of course at the time in the 1300s, music itself was different, and they weren't doing the same types of things with music, and so there's the Clavis Ethereum, and that's what that looks like. Now we're gonna go back even before that. This idea of hammers or tangents or quills or anything striking a string inside of a mechanism was something that somebody came up with at some point, right? But before that, if you wanted to strike a string, you actually just struck the string. You know, now we're getting back into some instruments that were actually, you had a tangent, it's just that the tangent was in your hand and you were striking a string. Now there's a whole family of instruments. Hammered dulcimer is one of those instruments. There's another instrument from China called the yangqin. There's another instrument from India called the santur. And there's an instrument from Iran, Iraq, and Azerbaijan called the santur. I don't know what the difference in the pronunciation is, but I know the Indian one has the two O's, and the Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan one has the U in it. So, interesting how countries and regions with different languages still came up with the same type of sound and name for this instrument. But all of them kind of had the same concept. You have strings, and you're striking them with tangents, I guess. Effectively, you're just striking them with tangents and playing the music that way. There's some great videos with this band called House of Waters, and they have a fantastic hammer dulcimer player. The band is really cool. It's just a drummer, bass player, and a hammer dulcimer player, and they play funk and soul music and kind of ethereal type of music. It's really good. It's really good to listen to. If you want to check them out, one of their songs that I really like is called Kites. Came out pretty recently, and they're a really good group, really strong musicians, and they really take care of and kind of pay homage to the craft of what it is to play a hammered dulcimer, and they use it in the right way, in my opinion. I think it's great. And then we going back even further, we have a monochord, right? A monochord. Imagine an instrument that has a whole bunch of strings on it that are all tuned to the same pitch. But there it is, monochord. Now, the monochord actually came about during the time of Pythagoras, yeah, the guy who, the self-proclaimed son of Hermes, the math guy, all those theorems, Pythagorean theorem, right? Yeah, that's Pythagoras. He actually played a monochord, and he had a whole set of rules on how to play it, because he actually used math to figure out how a string could be plucked or sounded based off of mathematic ratios. For instance, if you have a string and you pluck it, it has a principal pitch. If you take it right in half, right in the middle of the string, and pluck it, that the frequency is doubled, therefore making the same pitch an octave higher. And so he had all these math equations for how you're supposed to use a string instrument, and believe it or not, we still use those exact same things today. Well, not the exact same, because there's equal temperament and everything else, but we use the same types of math equations to understand how to use, or how to play string instruments even to this day. And a lot of that came from Pythagoras. Yeah, he was a weird guy. He was a weird guy. He was just weird. So there's Pythagoras. And we can go back even further. King David in the Bible. If we read in the Bible, King David actually played, it says a harp as we translate it today, but obviously it wasn't a harp like you would look at today. It was a different type of stringed instrument, right? And this is somewhere between Pythagoras and the Dark Ages. They were somewhere between there. They started hammering it, but then there's Pythagoras, and we don't know. Maybe he played it by his fingers, maybe he hammered it, we don't know. But then King David, it doesn't say that he played it with hammers, who knows, right? But he did play this harp, and that was around, by the church's tradition, they say that David lived around 1035 to 970 BC. Pythagoras, of course, lived 570 to 495 BC. So David predates Pythagoras by a couple hundred years. And then you can go back even further than that. I mean, we're talking another 1,500 years before David. Ancient China, there was an instrument called a ke. Please, if you speak Cantonese, you speak Mandarin, you speak ancient Chinese, whatever the language was, please explain to me. If you maybe put something down in the comments on how to pronounce the word ke. I apologize in advance for not knowing ancient Chinese. And that was 2650 BC. They have examples of this instrument, which is, it's a bunch of different strings, and they all have different pitches, and they play it in a manner sort of like, not like a piano with keys, but sort of like you would, like a piano type of instrument. So, there are so many things when you're talking about a stringed instrument where you hit a key. The history is just so vast. And it's one of those things that everything has its offshoots, and along the way we had stringed instruments, and maybe there was a harp, and this branch turned into a violin modern day, and then this branch turned into a piano, and this branch, people took the idea of the keys that were already there and then they put some electronics on. There's so many, it just branches off, but it's all music making instruments. Something that kind of puts them all together is the fact that they had the manual, which is the keys that you touch, and that's about it. So much history behind the piano and the piano-like instruments. When we were talking about the keyboard in the note distinction class, we talked about just the note names and what they are. Like, we got C, we got C sharp, we got all the different note names and all that. And if you are thinking about learning in-depth music theory itself and not just the history of the instruments that make it, you need to sign up for Note Distinction Music Journey, because we are having a great time. We do live sessions every other week. We do the pre-recorded lessons. The pre-recorded lessons are great. Some of them range from 18 minutes to 45 minutes. Some of them are pretty long. And there's 16 pre-recorded lessons over the course of the year, and we take you from not knowing what a note is to producing a piece of music that you can record and sequence drums and make beats and rap on, or composing your own piece of music. We do all that in 16 classes, but every other week. On the opposite week, we do live sessions. There's homework involved. This is great for homeschool kids. This is great for young people, old people, people that are just hobbyists, people that have been playing for a long time and they want to shore up some of their knowledge. This is just a great music course for everybody, and I really appreciate the students that we have, because we have such a great time in the live sessions. Man, they're a blast. But on top of that, I look forward to having all the new students that we're going to get as soon as possible, because note distinction is a great thing. I love it. I even got a shirt that has it written on it, and my name is Ezra Washington. I'm actually Professor Washington as far as note distinction is concerned, and I hope to see you soon. So now, for this next class, lesson 2, make sure that you do your homework, and make sure that you people at home, you guys do your homework, and we'll be able to talk next week on our live session. And in the meantime, make sure you're making music and being active.